He came to automate a warehouse, but met the heart of a town instead. The first thing Christopher Hale noticed about the town was how small it looked from above. From the helicopter window, Ohio stretched beneath him in faded winter colors, fields stitched together with narrow roads and tired neighborhoods, until the warehouse appeared like a concrete scar in the middle of farmland. Apex Logistics Hub Number 47. Soon to be fully automated. Soon to be efficient. Soon to be silent. He scrolled through the numbers on his tablet while the aircraft descended. Labor costs unsustainable. Manual error rate 7%. Projected savings 48 million annually. 312 jobs affected. He didn't think of them as people. They were variables, and variables were meant to be optimized. This trip was supposed to be simple. Launch the pilot program, prove automation works, and set the template for every small facility in the country. Progress didn't ask permission. It replaced what was obsolete. The town hall was already packed when he arrived. Work boots on polished floors, hand-painted protest signs, the smell of cheap coffee and cold air. Conversations died the moment he walked in. They didn't see a man in a suit. They saw layoffs wearing a face. Christopher had presented to billion-dollar boards before, but the silence that greeted him here was different. It wasn't respect, it was hunger. Before he could speak, Sophia Morales stood. She didn't use the microphone. She didn't need to. "You call it optimization," she said, her voice anchoring the restless room. "We call it an eviction notice for 300 families." Christopher looked at her, grease under her nails, eyes like flint, and realized the briefing had lied. Sophia wasn't an agitator. She was the town's gravity. He stepped up, his voice the surgical steel to her raw iron. "The facility is hemorrhaging capital, Sophia. Without automation, the shutdown is total. It's not a choice between machines and people. It's a choice between a smaller heartbeat and a corpse." He didn't use the corporate slide deck. He spoke directly to her. "Stability is the only future you have left." Sophia didn't flinch. "You're treating survival like a math problem," she countered. "And you're treating a business like a museum," he snapped back. In the sudden heat of the exchange, the crowd faded. It was no longer a public hearing. It was a collision of two people who realized they were finally being answered by an equal. "You see spreadsheets," she said quietly. "You see sentiment," he answered. "I see my neighbors. I see sustainability." The space between them felt charged, like air before a storm. Christopher found himself noticing things he shouldn't. The steadiness of her posture, the way the entire crowd seemed to take cues from her, the stubborn warmth in her eyes. She wasn't emotional or irrational like he had expected. She was strategic, articulate, dangerous in a completely different way. If she ever worked inside a boardroom, she would terrify people like him. After the meeting, the crowd spilled outside into the cold evening. Instead of yelling, they simply watched him, memorizing his face. Sophia stood near the steps with her arms crossed. When he approached, she accused him of wanting to understand the community without actually talking to anyone. He said he was talking to her. She smirked, half amused despite herself, and that brief smile unsettled him more than all the hostility inside the hall. She asked if he had ever worked a warehouse shift. He admitted he hadn't. She told him, then he didn't really know what he was destroying. There was no hatred in her voice, just certainty. That certainty bothered him. Finally, she told him to come at 6 in the morning if he truly wanted context. Come to the floor, not the control room, and see the people he planned to replace. He asked why she would invite him. She said so he would stop pretending they were just numbers. That night, alone in his hotel room, Christopher opened the automation model again. 312 positions highlighted in red. For the first time, the number didn't feel abstract. He kept seeing Sophia's face in the council chamber, hearing the steadiness of her voice, remembering how easily she challenged him. The project was supposed to be mechanical and predictable, but suddenly one variable refused to fit into any equation. Against every rational instinct, he already knew he would show up at 6 a.m. He told himself it was research, due diligence, nothing more. Still, as he set the alarm and stared out at the quiet streets of the sleeping town, he couldn't shake the strange realization that out of everything here, the crumbling buildings, the outdated warehouse, the failing economics, she was the only thing that felt undeniably alive. Christopher arrived at 5:50 a.m., but the warehouse had already beaten him to it. The air was a thick mix of diesel exhaust and the ozone tang of heavy machinery. a restless, rhythmic pulse that didn't exist in his simulations. Sophia appeared through the steam of the loading docks, two scarred paper cups in hand. She didn't say hello. She just handed him the coffee and gestured toward the sorting line. "Watch," she said. "This isn't a spreadsheet. It's an ecosystem." She walked him through the chaos, introducing names rather than job codes. Tom, whose hands moved with a fluid instinct no robotic arm could mimic yet. Maribel, who caught a labeling error that the current sensors had missed 3 times. Pete, who listened to the hum of the main belt like a doctor listening to a heart. Christopher found himself reaching for his tablet, then stopping. The labor redundancy he had mapped out looked different when it had a face and a son's science project waiting at home. For the first time, the variables started to bleed. They climbed a metal staircase overlooking the sorting lines. Sophia leaned on the railing and watched the workers below like a captain watching her crew. "My grandfather started here when this place was just a dirt lot," she said. "My dad met my mom here. I grew up playing hide and seek between pallets. This warehouse paid for braces, funerals, college, everything. You shut it down or replace us. You're not cutting a cost center. You're cutting a family tree." Christopher listened without interrupting. Normally, he would counter with forecasts and projections, but the words felt thin in his mouth. Instead, he asked questions, real ones. How long did training take? Which tasks were the hardest? Where did accidents happen most? Sophia noticed the shift immediately. "You're actually trying to understand," she said, surprised. He shrugged. "Data's useless without context." She smiled at that, softer this time, and something in his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with business. By the 4th day, Christopher's operational study had dissolved into a quiet immersion. He followed Sophia through the town's hidden capillaries, the diner where the owner kept a tab for families on medical leave, the mural on Main Street that served as a hand-painted obituary for the retired, and the mechanic shop that ran on handshakes and credit. It was a network of mutual debts and shared history that no algorithm could calculate. In Chicago, he was a ghost in a glass tower. Here, he was becoming a visible part of a fragile organism. The boardrooms and tailored suits felt like a costume he had outgrown. Over cheap beer and the sharp, honest sound of Sophia's laughter, the constant internal calculation for Apex finally went silent, replaced by a sense of belonging he hadn't felt since he was a boy. The attraction crept up on them quietly. It started with longer eye contact, with shoulders brushing in narrow hallways, with arguments that turned into teasing instead of hostility. Sophia challenged him constantly, calling out his corporate jargon, forcing him to speak like a person instead of a press release. He surprised her by listening. One night, they ended up sitting on the hood of his rental car outside the warehouse, sharing greasy takeout and talking about everything except automation. She told him she had once wanted to be an architect before life got complicated. He admitted he had never chosen Apex. He had simply inherited it, like gravity. The distance between them shrank until the conversation dissolved into silence. When he kissed her, it wasn't strategic or hesitant. It was sudden, messy, human. For a moment, the world simplified into breath and warmth and the dizzy relief of not being alone. But every morning, reality waited on his laptop. In the sterile quiet of his motel room, Christopher opened the automation architecture and felt like he was staring at an execution order. The board's mandate was absolute, full replacement. But as his fingers hovered over the keys, he began to deviate. He started carving out space in the code for the people he'd met, building a hybrid framework that integrated human intuition with mechanical precision. It was an act of quiet sabotage disguised as optimization. He justified the slower ROI to himself as long-term stability, but as he watched the cursor blink, he knew it was for the handshake from Tom and the way Sophia looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. He wasn't just fixing a warehouse anymore. He was trying to save his own soul. At night, though, another file waited in his inbox, the final authorization order. Mass workforce reduction. Signature required. His signature. The board had already approved it. All he had to do was execute. Every time he opened the document, his stomach tightened. He didn't tell Sophia about it. He told himself he would explain later, after he fixed everything, after he found a way to save both the company and the town. It felt noble in his head. In reality, it was a lie by omission. One evening they stood together on the loading dock, watching the sunset bleed orange across the sky. Workers were clocking out, joking, slapping each other's backs, promising to meet at the bar. Sophia rested her head briefly against his shoulder. "You know," she said, "for a corporate robot, you're not half bad." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Don't tell anyone. Ruins my brand." She looked up at him, serious now. "You're different from them, Christopher. You actually care." The words hit harder than any accusation ever had. Because he wanted them to be true. Because he wasn't sure they were. He wrapped an arm around her and held her closer, feeling the fragile happiness settle between them like something borrowed. Later that night, alone again with the glow of his screen, he stared at the unsigned order and the rewritten hybrid code side by side. Two futures. One clean and profitable and cruel. The other messy and human and risky. For the first time in his life, the rational choice wasn't obvious. Outside his window, the warehouse lights flickered like a small city refusing to sleep, and Christopher realized he had already crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He wasn't just studying the town anymore. He was becoming part of it. And when the truth finally surfaced, when Sophia discovered what that document really meant, the fall was going to hurt a lot more than either of them was prepared for. The collapse happened at 7:02 a.m. on a Monday. Christopher woke to a phone vibrating with the frantic rhythm of a corporate heart attack. 30 missed calls from legal, HR, and his father. Before he could clear his head, Arthur's voice was in his ear, not angry, but devastatingly calm. "You made a fundamental mistake, Christopher. You started believing the people were the product." Christopher gripped the edge of the desk. "What did you do?" "I protected the firm," Arthur replied. "The town is revolting, and the investors need a sacrifice. We've leaked your initial, total automation, white paper to the press. By noon, every worker in that warehouse will see your signature on the plan to erase them. Pack your bags. You're done." Christopher sat up so fast, he almost knocked the lamp over. "What are you talking about? That was months ago. Before you forgot who you are." Arthur said dryly. "Investors are nervous. The town's protests are getting louder. So we give them a villain. You, the brilliant architect of efficiency. If they hate someone, they stop questioning the company." Christopher's throat tightened. "You're sacrificing me?" Arthur didn't hesitate. "I'm protecting Apex." Within the hour, local news stations were running the story. Headline banners screamed across every screen in the diner downtown. Apex exec designed mass layoff plan. Internal documents leaked. Christopher's photo, corporate headshot, polished smile, looked obscene next to footage of the warehouse workers unloading trucks. The article quoted numbers like weapons, 80% workforce reduction, full automation, immediate shutdown of legacy lines. His signature sat at the bottom of the document like a confession. He tried calling Sophia. No answer. He texted. Nothing. The silence was worse than shouting. By the time he reached the town hall, a crowd had already formed outside. Homemade signs. Anger thick in the air. People who had nodded politely at him last week now stared like he'd personally robbed their homes. Someone muttered, "Corporate snake." Someone else spat near his shoes. Christopher kept walking, feeling every step heavier, like gravity had doubled. Inside, Sophia stood near the front, organizing volunteers for an emergency meeting. She looked exhausted, eyes red, jaw tight. When she saw him, she froze. Not surprised, not relieved, just still. The space between them felt wider than the entire warehouse floor. "I can explain," he said immediately. It sounded pathetic even to him. "Can you?" Her voice was calm, which scared him more than yelling would have. She held up her phone with the article open. "Did you write this plan?" "Yes, but it was before I." "Did you design the system that replaces us?" "I changed it. I'm rewriting it." "I swear, Sophia, it's not what they're launching." "But you did design it," she repeated. He hesitated. 1 second too long. That was enough. A few workers nearby started whispering. Someone laughed bitterly. Sophia nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked into place. "So all those walks," she said. "All those questions. You learning our stories. You weren't trying to understand us. You were mapping us. Finding weak spots." "No," he said, stepping closer. "That's not true." "Then what was it?" she snapped. "Market research? Emotional manipulation? Were you sleeping with me for data too?" The words hit harder than any boardroom attack ever had. "Don't say that. It wasn't like that. None of it was fake." "Really?" Her laugh broke halfway through. "Because it feels pretty damn convenient. The executive who just happens to date the woman organizing the resistance. That's not romance, Christopher. That's infiltration. He reached for her hand, and she pulled back like he'd burned her. Around them, the room grew louder. People arguing, shouting, planning protests. But all he could hear was the rush of blood in his ears. He wanted to tell her everything about the hybrid model, about the nights he spent rewriting code, about the unsigned order sitting on his laptop. But it sounded like excuses in his head. Too late. Too convenient. My dad did this, he said quietly. The leak. The timing. He's forcing me out. Stop blaming your father, Sophia said. You're not a kid. You're the operations director of a billion-dollar company. You don't get to hide behind family drama. These were your choices. And she was right. That's what made it unbearable. By afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting over video. Christopher joined from his motel room. 12 faces in expensive suits, all pretending to be disappointed instead of calculating. Arthur didn't even look angry. He looked bored. Given the conflict of interest and reputational risk, one director said, we're suspending you from operational authority effective immediately. Another added, the hard automation rollout will proceed under direct board supervision. Christopher felt the air leave his lungs. You can't, he said. The town isn't ready. You'll destroy this place. Arthur folded his hands. Progress requires sacrifice. It doesn't have to be 80%, Christopher shot back. There's a hybrid model. I built it. It works. Arthur's expression didn't change. We're not running a charity. The call ended. Just like that. Years of loyalty erased in 5 minutes. That night, the warehouse parking lot filled with cars and angry voices. Sophia stood on the back of a pickup truck, speaking to the crowd through a megaphone. Christopher watched from the shadows, not brave enough to step closer. She looked stronger than ever, fire in her eyes, grief turned into purpose. They think we're numbers, she shouted. They think we'll just disappear quietly. We show them we're not disposable. We strike. We shut it down before they shut us down. The crowd roared approval. It should have inspired him. Instead, it felt like watching a train rushing toward a broken bridge. For the first time since coming here, Christopher realized he didn't belong to either world anymore. The board saw him as a liability. The town saw him as a traitor. He had burned both bridges without noticing. He drove back to the motel long after midnight and opened his laptop again. The hard automation deployment schedule glowed on the screen. Start date moved up. Immediate execution. No negotiations. No delays. Sophia was preparing a strike. The board was preparing security and legal action. If both sides collided, it would get ugly. Arrests. Violence. Maybe worse. Christopher stared at the admin console, at the lines of access credentials only he still possessed. Senior-level overrides. Backdoors he himself had installed years ago for emergency contingencies. For the first time, he didn't see them as tools of efficiency. He saw them as weapons. He whispered to the empty room. There has to be another way. But deep down, he already knew. If he wanted to save the town, and maybe earn even a fraction of Sophia's trust back, he would have to betray Apex completely. And once he crossed that line, there would be no coming back. By the end of the week, the town felt like a place waiting for a storm. Not the kind with thunder and rain, but the quiet, suffocating kind where the air gets heavy and every sound seems too loud. Store owners talked in whispers. Trucks stood idle near the loading docks. The warehouse lights still burned at night, but fewer people walked through the gates. Everyone knew something was coming. Nobody knew how bad it would be. Christopher stopped trying to call Sophia. After their last conversation, every message he typed sounded selfish. Every explanation looked like damage control. So he did the only thing he could do. He worked. He barely slept. Coffee, code, repeat. His laptop screen became his entire world. Lines of system architecture, deployment scripts, failover protocols. The hard automation plan the board approved was brutal in its simplicity. At midnight on launch day, the new AI scheduler would take control. Human shifts would be locked out. Badge access revoked automatically. Robots online. Legacy lines offline. 80% of the workforce gone in less than 12 hours. Clean. Efficient. Inhuman. Christopher stared at the numbers like they were body counts. He opened the old hybrid model he'd secretly built. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Humans handled exceptions, fragile goods, repairs, local routing. Machines handled repetition and heavy lifting. Productivity stayed high. Jobs stayed alive. It was slower than full automation, sure, but it didn't gut an entire town. The board hadn't even looked at it. To them, people were friction. Around noon, he got the official email. Subject: termination notice. Corporate language: polite, sterile, effective immediately. His access would be revoked within 24 hours. After that, he'd be just another civilian. Christopher read it twice and laughed under his breath. Not because it was funny, because the timing was almost poetic. They were cutting him off right before launch. Like they were afraid he might interfere. The thought stuck. Interfere. That night he drove past the warehouse and saw lights in the parking lot. Dozens of people, maybe hundreds. Hand-painted banners. Portable speakers. Someone had set up a small stage from pallets. Sophia stood in the middle of it all, moving fast, talking to groups, organizing shifts for the strike. She looked exhausted but unstoppable, like a general before battle. He stayed inside the car for a long time, engine off, watching. He didn't deserve to walk up to her. But he couldn't stay away either. When he finally stepped out, conversation slowed. Heads turned. The same looks as before. Suspicion. Anger. Someone muttered, "What the hell is he doing here?" Sophia saw him and stiffened. He raised both hands slightly, like he was approaching a wild animal. "I'm not here to argue," he said. "Just listen." She crossed her arms. "We don't need another speech from corporate." "I'm not corporate anymore," he said. "They fired me this morning." That got her attention, just a flicker. "And?" she asked. "You want sympathy?" "No," he said quietly. "I want you to know what they're planning." They stepped aside from the crowd, close enough to hear the chants, far enough to talk without everyone listening. "They moved the launch up," Christopher said. "Midnight tomorrow. Not next week. Tomorrow. They're locking everyone out automatically. No negotiations. No transition." Her jaw tightened. "So we strike tonight. If you block the gates, they'll call the police," he said. "Private security, too. They're expecting resistance. They're ready for it." "So what's your solution?" she snapped. "We just let them fire our parents and grandparents with an email?" "No," he said. "I'm saying a head-on collision is exactly what they want. If you look violent, they win the narrative. Investors stay calm. Town looks irrational." She studied him, trying to decide if this was another manipulation. "I still have senior credentials," he continued. "Backdoor access. I built parts of the system. I can get inside before midnight." "And do what?" she asked. He swallowed. "Freeze it. Delay the deployment. Lock the scheduler. By time." "That's illegal," she said immediately. "Yeah," he answered. "Very." Silence stretched between them. "If you get caught," she said, "they'll destroy you. Lawsuits. Maybe prison." "I know. And you'd be doing it for the same people you were about to replace." He didn't look away. "I'm doing it because I was wrong." That was the first completely honest thing he'd said all week. She searched his face for cracks, for calculation. There wasn't any left. Just fear and something stubborn underneath it. "You could walk away," she said softly. "Go back to New York. Get another job. Forget this town ever existed." "I tried," he said. "I can't." The chants behind them grew louder. Someone started a drumbeat on a metal barrel. It sounded like a heartbeat. "If this fails," Sophia said, "they'll blame the workers. They'll say we sabotaged it." "Then don't let them," Christopher said. "Keep it peaceful. Make it visible. Media. Cameras. If the system goes down, it looks like technical failure, not you." She hesitated, then asked the question that really mattered. "Why should I trust you?" He didn't defend himself. Didn't explain. Just said, "You probably shouldn't. But this is the only shot we've got." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she stepped closer. "If you're lying," she whispered, "I swear to God I will never forgive you." "Fair," he said. She nodded once. "Decision made. Then do it. Close. Not a hug. Not forgiveness. But not distance either." For them, that was huge. Near midnight, Christopher walked into the warehouse alone. His old badge still worked. One last courtesy from the system. The building felt different without people. Too quiet. Robots parked in neat rows like sleeping animals. Emergency lights reflecting off polished floors. The future, sterile and empty. He reached the control room and powered up the main console. The deployment countdown glowed on the screen. 23 minutes. His hands shook as he logged in. Senior partner access. Privileged credentials. Root override. He could still hear Arthur's voice in his head. Progress requires sacrifice. Christopher typed faster. Not tonight. He injected his custom patch into the scheduler, rewriting priorities, creating artificial conflicts, forcing the system into a protective halt state. To corporate, it would look like a catastrophic software failure. Weeks of diagnostics. Weeks they couldn't legally fire everyone without operational proof. 10 minutes. 5. Sweat dripped down his back. Then alarms flashed red across the screen. Unauthorized modification detected. Come on, he muttered. He executed the final command. System lock engaged. Deployment aborted. The countdown froze at 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Silence. No swarm of robots. No automatic shutdown. Just nothing. Christopher leaned back in the chair, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, through the high windows, he could see the parking lot lights and the crowd still standing there together. For the first time since arriving in this town, he felt like he had actually chosen a side. And there was no way back. Not after this. At 6 in the morning, the warehouse still hadn't started. No robots moving. No conveyor belts. No automated arms swinging into place like a mechanical sunrise. Just silence. The kind of silence that spreads fast. Workers gathered outside the gates expecting termination emails. Instead, their phones stayed quiet. Supervisors paced with tablets that kept refreshing the same red error message. System failure. Deployment postponed. Manual operations only. Nobody understood what happened, but everyone understood one thing. They still had jobs today. Word traveled through town like electricity. By 8, local radio stations were talking about it. By 9, regional news vans showed up. Unexpected technical malfunction delays major automation rollout. Analysts on TV called it a glitch. Investors called it a risk. For the first time, Apex didn't look invincible. Sophia stood with the others near the entrance, arms wrapped around herself against the cold morning air. She kept checking the doors, half expecting security to drag Christopher out in handcuffs. He didn't come out. An hour later, black SUVs rolled into the parking lot. Corporate. She felt her stomach drop. 2 security guards escorted Christopher outside. No cuffs, but close enough that it didn't matter. His badge was already gone. Laptop confiscated. Face pale but calm. Their eyes met across the lot. He gave her a small nod like, "It's okay." It wasn't okay. Arthur stepped out of one of the cars. Perfect coat. Perfect posture. The kind of man who looked like he'd never lost a negotiation in his life. He didn't even glance at the workers. Only at his son. They talked privately near the vehicles. Too far to hear, close enough to see the body language. Arthur sharp and controlled. Christopher steady. At one point, Arthur gestured toward the warehouse like it was a broken toy. Then toward the highway, like he was offering an exit. Christopher shook his head. Once. Twice. Final. Arthur's expression hardened. He said something short and cold. Then he walked away without looking back. A clean disowning. Just like that. The guards handed Christopher a folder and left him standing alone in the parking lot like trash someone forgot to take out. He walked toward Sophia. Each step looked heavier than the last. "They fired me," he said simply. "For cause. Breach of fiduciary duty. System tampering. There's probably going to be a lawsuit." She nodded. "I figured. I lost my shares. My board seat. Everything." He let out a dry laugh. "Turns out betraying a billion-dollar corporation has consequences." She searched his face. "Do you regret it?" He looked at the workers behind her. Older men with worn jackets. Single moms holding coffee cups. Kids who'd come to watch because their parents were scared. Then back at her. "No," he said. "Not even a little." For a moment, neither of them spoke. No dramatic music. No cheering. Just morning light and tired people who had survived one more day. By noon, the story exploded online. Executive sabotages own company to protect small town. Reporters framed it as whistleblowing. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions. Advocacy groups jumped in. Suddenly, Apex wasn't a symbol of innovation. It was a symbol of heartless automation. Stock price dipped. Not catastrophic, but enough. Enough to make the board nervous. Within 48 hours, the narrative shifted. Apex announced a reevaluation of community impact strategies. Consultants. Committees. Damage control. A week later, they sent negotiators. Hybrid operations. Gradual automation. Retraining programs. No immediate mass layoffs. Not kindness. Math. Bad press was more expensive than compromise. Sophia sat across from them in the union hall with lawyers and city officials. For the first time, Apex didn't dictate terms. They asked, Christopher wasn't allowed inside the meeting. Legally toxic now. Too radioactive. He waited outside on the steps like everyone else. When Sophia finally came out, her face was unreadable. "Well?" he asked. She held his gaze for a second. Then she smiled. They folded. He exhaled so hard, he almost laughed. "Seriously? Hybrid model," she said. "Almost exactly what you built. They even called it an innovative collaborative framework." He rolled his eyes. "Corporate poetry. But it works," she said. "People keep their jobs." The weight in his chest loosened for the first time in months. "So," he said quietly, "you saved the town." She shook her head. "We saved it." They stood there awkwardly, the fight finally over. Without the crisis, everything felt strangely fragile. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. He looked toward the highway, the direction of airports and glass towers, and the life he used to have. Then back at the warehouse. Rust. Noise. Real people. "I don't think there's a place for me up there anymore," he said. "And honestly, I don't want one." "You're really staying?" "No backup plan." He shrugged. "I know logistics. Systems. Operations. Turns out small towns need that stuff too." She studied him, like she was checking if this was another temporary phase. "It wasn't." "Good," she said softly. "Because we could use the help. Not I need you. Not I forgive you. Just something simple and real. We could use the help." It meant more. A month later, the warehouse reopened under the new model. Fewer robots than planned. More people than expected. Messier. Slower. Human. Christopher showed up in a cheap work jacket instead of a suit. No title. No office. Just a folding desk near dispatch helping redesign routes and training workers on the new software. People still looked at him funny sometimes. But they also brought him coffee. Asked questions. Included him. For the first time in his life, nobody cared what his last name was. One evening, after shift change, Sophia found him standing on the loading dock watching the sunset bleed orange over the empty fields. "You know," she said, "a year ago I hated everything you represented." "Fair," he said. "And now you're fixing barcode scanners with my uncle." "Character development," he said. She laughed. The sound hit him harder than any boardroom victory ever had. They stood shoulder to shoulder, not touching at first. No empire. No inheritance. No safety net. Just the warehouse lights flickering on behind them in a town that was still alive. "Scared?" she asked. "Terrified," he said. "I've never built anything without money before." She bumped her shoulder into his. "Good. Now you're building it for real." He looked at her. At the grease on her hands. The stubborn spark in her eyes. The future that wasn't shiny but honest. "Worth it?" he asked. She intertwined her fingers with his. "Yeah," she said. "Worth it." The old world had burned down. But standing there, on cracked concrete with tired hands and a second chance, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning.